Hey guys, it's Peter here, back in the chair for our next video in Relationship Month. Now, if you haven't seen the last video, let's just do a quick recap of what we discussed. And that was really revealing the biggest kept secret in relationships, which is that nobody can ever love you more than you love yourself. And we discussed a lot of concepts around what love actually is, as opposed to what most people believe it to be. We also touched on a couple of exercises you can do that really allow you to start experiencing more love in your life by raising your own level of self-love. Now, again, I go into this in a lot more detail on some of my seminars where we really solve the issues and the underlying challenges that people face. But for now, this is going to be a great start for you just by going through some of those basic exercises. Thank you for your comments. I already had some great comments, and feel free to keep adding comments, and especially to this video as well. And if you've got any questions, I try to answer and respond to as many people as I can, as you see. And so, please make this an interaction rather than just a monologue. So what are we going to talk about this time? Well, what I really want to talk about is some of the differences between men and women. And yes, there are differences. So, for all of you sort of feminists out there that think, well, hang on a minute, no, women are not going to be stereotyped into being different to men. I want to just make a quick distinction here, and I'm not picking on feminists. There's, the guys have the same warning from me here as well. And that is that we're not talking about differences in ability. That's a key distinction to understand. Yes, women, there is nothing that a man can do that you can't do. In fact, you don't even need men these days to have children. That's how far advanced we've become as a civilization. But I'm not talking about different abilities. I'm talking about differences in biology, neurology, biochemistry, and therefore certain behaviors and patterns that are exhibited that most people, unfortunately, don't take into account, especially in relationships, because they're too busy imposing their own model of the world onto other people. And as a result, what I'm going to lead into this video is that by the end, I'm going to share with you what I believe to be the fastest way to unhappiness. Now, why would I share with you the fastest way to unhappiness when everybody's trying to get the secret of happiness? Because if you don't know what that fastest route to unhappiness is and you keep taking it, then it doesn't matter what else you learn. You're going to be tripping over your shoelaces in order to try to get to the end of the race. So if we start off with understanding the difference between men and women, I use that label, men and women, very generically and with caution, because although we're talking about gross generalizations when it comes to gender, we all know within each gender there are many different shades of grey, many different variances, nuances, and uniquenesses. And so instead of getting hooked upon the labels of men and women, what I'd rather suggest, if you'll permit me, is to reclassify that in talking about masculine and feminine energy, masculine and feminine tendencies, masculine and feminine characteristics, which are inherent to the nature and the biology and the physiology of the different genders. But you can also have some very naturally masculine women, and you can have some naturally effeminate and very feminine men. That's not a criticism, it's an observation. The fact that as soon as we start bandering around labels like men and women, we are covering up the level of insight that we have access to through stereotypes, and that's not what this is about. So let's talk about a little bit about what I mean by masculine energy. Well, masculine energy, which we all have access to, men and women, is very core directed. It's monofocused. It's the ability to laser in on a particular concept, problem, solution, scenario, to the distraction of all others, to really being able to focus on one particular thing at a time. It's goal-orientated, solution-orientated. It has a fairly black and white way of looking at things, which is how solution orientation tends to manifest. It's usually very territorial. It can be about standing one's ground, standing up for boundaries, having that warrior-based energy that really sort of steps forward. And when I say that men and women have access to this, of course they do. If I was to ask you, are you left-handed or right-handed? You would probably answer me one or the other. Well, the truth is no, you're both-handed, but you tend to favor one more than the other. Are you a man or a woman? Well, no, you're a human. but you tend to favor relying more on or having a natural predisposition to exhibiting more feminine characteristics or more masculine characteristics, depending on where your base is. And occasionally you may be neutral or middle of the road, or ambidextrous, to use my previous metaphor. So, men, and I can go into this in much more detail, but I just want to give a generalization here at a surface level of understanding, which I think is important to set up the point when you realize the fastest way to unhappiness. Feminine energy, on the other hand, is very different. It's very much like nature. It's always in motion. It could be, one thing one minute, something completely different the next. And if you're looking at it from a masculine perspective, it doesn't, and guys, listen to me, never will make sense. Nature's not about making sense. Nature's about exhibiting energy in motion. The weather doesn't make sense, especially if you're planning a barbecue on Saturday. Then be prepared to be surprised or disappointed if you're trying to get it to fit your pictures. Whereas feminine is always seeing in parallel. There's more than one thing at a time. Masculine is about noticing the the white car in the parking lot full of black cars. It zeroes in on what's different. Feminine sees everything. It sees the cars and the parking lot and the trees and the buildings, and it's a very diffuse awareness. And we can call that multitasking ability in the feminine, something that guys are not usually as good at unless we're in our feminine energy. Again, we can access both. So to understand that at a biological level, at the level of brain science, neurology, that there are very different distinctions in the anatomy of a male brain and a female brain, which lead to a tendency and a characteristic of accessing these different behaviors. Men and women think differently as a result of the anatomy in the brain. And every time you think a thought, you produce a chemical. That chemical manifests as a feeling or an emotion. And so, we can tend to understand that ability is not in question here, but there are characteristics and personality traits of masculine and feminine that are clearly and obviously in our society very, very different. So what is the fastest way to unhappiness? Well, it starts with appreciating that there are differences in men and women, not in ability, not in ability to learn, not in ability to perform tasks or functions or engage in business or looking after the kids. Men and women are ambidextrous in their ability to perform tasks. However, when it comes to really exhibiting their innate personality, character, and model of the world, how they see something and how their inner processing is whirring away, and the conclusion it draws based upon that, well, we have a very different life in both of those different skulls. So, fastest way to unhappiness? First of all, we have to realize people are different. I want to share with you a very simple example that'll drive this home. See, when we are dealing with the outer world, anything in the outer world, anything that is in what we call this third dimensional perception of reality. For those familiar with my work, I subscribe very much to the simulation hypothesis, and we can get deep into that, but that's not this video. But if we go into stuff that's happening in your life, the story of your life, your job, your career, your family, whatever's going on, then anything in the outer world, in order for you to process it, to make sense of it, to experience it, it first has to come through a series of receptors that interpret that information. We call those receptors senses. The 5 physical senses are the most obvious. Sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. In other words, there is nothing that can be happening, including you watching this video right now, that can mean anything to you unless it's first passed through one of those 5 filters. Now that leads me on to my next question. How many people do you know that all like the same food? Well, in that scenario, we have a variable, obviously. Or what about the same smell? That's why there's so many different perfumes and aftershaves, because we have a very different sense of what we like to smell. What about music? Does everybody have the same favorite music? Well, of course not. Wow, hang on a minute. So that's 3 out of the 5 senses that we're using that can interpret information, and they can be different for every person. Wow, never thought of that before. What about sight? Does everybody have the same favorite color? See, we even have different preferences on how we understand the visual processing Once it hits our eyes and then gets bounced through the optic nerve to the brain in order to form a picture that we call life. And then obviously we have touch. We have different sense of what we like to touch. Whether it's a tactile sensation or smooth sensation. Some people like crunchy peanut butter, some people like smooth peanut butter. So the texture plays a huge part as well. Some people are more hot climate people, some people are more cold climate people. So there's a different interpretation of what we like to experience through the sensation of touch. So if you understand that we have 5 physical senses that are responsible for processing all incoming information into the body, and every single one of those can process the information differently to allow you to come up with a very different conclusion based upon that data input, then what does that mean? That means that you can have 2 people, husband and wife, standing next to each other in the same moment in time, breathing the same air, experiencing the same event, using the same equipment to process that event called the 5 senses, and come up with an entirely different conclusion as to what it means. Now, what's the obvious thing there that jumps out? Let me ask the question, which one of them is right? And if you're like most people, you'll obviously answer by default, which says, well, of course I'm right. Because you're right in how you interpret and experience what's coming in through your senses. So what does this play in relationships? How does this affect things in relationships? Well, the fastest way to unhappiness and the biggest cause of stress that I see in relationships, aside from financial, which is a whole different ballgame, the biggest stress is in 2 people experiencing the same reality and processing it in the same way and coming up with very, very different conclusions as to what it means, and then trying to justify to the other one why their opinion and their processing is right and why the other person's is wrong. Now, if somebody actually tells you you're wrong, what's the initial reaction you have? Oh, absolutely, thank you for letting me know. I didn't realize I was wrong. Thanks for pointing that out. I'll stay being wrong and see if I can be open to new ideas. No, that's not what we do. The reason we don't do that is because you being wrong or being labeled wrong by somebody else triggers the fear, the primary fear we have, which is the fear we're not enough. And because that's so unconscious, we have defense mechanisms like layers of the onion over the top. The most primary and basic being defend and attack. So if somebody says that I'm wrong, I'm not even listening to them. My default processing says that, well, it's clearly because you don't understand, so let me tell you why you don't understand, and let me tell you then why you're wrong, not me, and why I'm right. And hence we get into the descending argumentation, butting heads, and what turned out to be a beautiful relationship in the beginning suddenly turns into a slanging match where we're scoring points on who's right or wrong. And what do we do out of that? We make it about the other person not understanding. How he just doesn't get me anymore. He doesn't understand me. If he really loved me, then he would fill in the blank. And guess what? I've got news for you. 7.5 billion people on this planet, not one of them is going to process the reality or their reality the same way you process yours. So in order to increase the potential for love in a relationship, the one thing that is usually missing is tolerance. Tolerance of what? Oh, I just don't want to put up with that behavior. No, it's not about putting up with somebody else's behavior. It's about tolerance of their model of the world, their processing, their machinery, and the fact that it's going to be different to yours. And when you appreciate that, then you don't necessarily judge them as quickly. Because if the second you judge somebody in a relationship, I'll tell you right now, A, you lose all ability to influence them, and you lose all ability to share love. That's as soon as you judge somebody, there's no unconditional love at that point. It's the antithesis. So let's bring this full circle. What is the fastest way to unhappiness in love? Well, bearing in mind what I've just covered, I'll sum it up this way. It is the mistake that people make in thinking that they have a right to have somebody else act, do something, be something, make a decision based upon anything that you feel that they should do, act or behave or be in a particular way. Yeah, that is the fastest way to unhappiness, expecting somebody else to fit your pictures rather than appreciating the fact that they never will. Yeah, they may get close and they may match it temporarily in a, just like putting quarters in a slot in Vegas, you're going to have 3 cherries in a row at some point. Even a blind squirrel falls over a nut now and again. So, to rely on you being compatible at every level and that they must understand you and you must understand them, and you have this level of intellectual harmony, is Disneyland. To appreciate their uniqueness, their flaws, the fact that they do things differently, that they're not going to put the top on the toothpaste like you do. And the fact that your mother or father told you that that made you a good person and disciplined and theirs didn't, doesn't mean anything. And now, when it comes to boundaries, people say, well, what does that mean? I just put up with them? No. Your job is to be in your truth, be the best person, the best example of who you can be in a relationship. We're going to get onto this more in the next video. So, if you have a situation where you are expressing your disappointment at somebody else because they've done something, you have no right to change them. Oh, he leaves his underwear on the floor in the bedroom and it really winds me up. Well, guess what? You have no right to get them or force them to change. You've got no right to judge them. You have every right to invite them into the awareness that them doing that behavior causes you a little bit of stress, and then see if they modify that behavior. Now, if they don't, you've got no right to judge them for it. However, you have every right to choose not to pick up somebody else's underwear or wash it or live with a messy pig. That's your prerogative. That's you standing in your truth and your power, and appreciating somebody else for who they are and what they do, but not thinking that that's an excuse to put up with something that you don't like. If that's who they are, it's who they are. Don't expect them to change to fit your pictures. You can invite them, and maybe if you do it in the right way, they'll start the habit of picking their underwear up because they weren't even aware that it was upsetting you, using just that as an example. But more importantly, knowing that you have tolerance for other people's model of the world. They're not going to be perfect. You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. Our parents weren't perfect. We're just dealing with the way that we can deal with life. When it comes to relationships, the fastest way to mess that up is to expect somebody else to fit your pictures as to how you think that they should act, do, be, show up. And when you start to realize that, you can let go of your death grip on how you feel somebody else should behave. Start to loosen up, start to live and let live, start to take a breath and say, it's just who they are, it's what they do. And know that you probably have just as many behaviors that they're seeing. And if you have the emotional capacity to not judge them for that, but to love them unconditionally regardless, maybe you might just set the example of what they're inviting to do in return. And at that point, we can clear the biggest obstacle out of the way that usually leads to stress and a breakdown in what should be two people appreciating the hell out of each other rather than judging each other. Now, on that note, try and find something to appreciate about the person you're with or the person you may want to be with, and see what shows up. And I'll see you guys on the next video.